Hello and welcome to the Game Dev London podcast. Today I'm your host, Anna, and I have a lovely guest today, Oscar, and we're going to be talking about community design, or rather how game mechanics can affect what kind of communities the game will have. Hello, Oscar. How are you doing?
I'm very well. I'm very glad to be here as a guest, which is a nice change for me. And I've been thinking about community and games for a very, very long time. Can I say 1998 was my first community-based game? One of the first ever online gaming services called Wireplay. Yes, I am that old. It's not just a white beard for nothing.
I'm not sure I was even alive at the time.
You're not the first person to say that. Yeah, it's scary, but yeah.
Yeah, new generation, that's how you feel old. Anyways, toxicity is obviously like a big problem in games even now. And personally, I'm a strong believer it's our responsibility as game designers and game developers to make it go away. And I'm not only talking about like bans and reporting, but actually like fundamentally how you design a game will influence how people interact with each other. But also toxicity has been around for a long time, as you said. You've been there in 1998, so let's talk about a bit about history. So
So I mean, toxicity is the topic that comes up a lot, and there's an acronym TTP. I will let people work out what that is. Probably not the best thing to describe. Time two, and then you can describe what the P is another time in your own head. And this is very, very common when you're thinking about UGC, but it's a general principle. We often talk about the negatives of community, but I hope we can also explore the positives of community, because frankly, the most interesting games are the ones that are built around community. So let's talk about where did I get started in this? So back in 98, in the old dial-up modem days, yes, there was such a thing as a dial-up modem. We used to plug our devices into the phone lines, and strange sounds would emit, and out we would get connectivity. And this is the era of Quake, particularly Quake 2, and just about the point where Quake 3 was about to emerge. Unreal existed at that point. I got to meet some of the Unreal folks like Mark Rain back in the day. And then we were delighted to have Counter-Strike. In fact, my favourite story, which is a bit of a lie, but it is true, we saved Counter-Strike. They ran out of money. We bought them some new computers. Therefore, it's all us, isn't it? Okay, they got bought by Valve later. Minor detail. But in all of those experiences, there was the QuakeNet culture. So there was the online bulletin board style ICQ kind of online community talking and so on and so forth. And this is an era where privileged kids like me could go and we could explore and be free to use the kind of language that we used in school when parents weren't looking. We could egg each other on. We would gib people. That would mean we would eviscerate them, and so they'd stamp on their giblets. That's what gibbing was all about. We used a lot of aggressive, machoistic language, and not just guys, but mostly guys. Let's be honest. And again, that's probably an important point to make, is that people talk about this era as if it was only guys. It wasn't. It just was mostly guys. And we were in dark rooms. Yes, of course we were, because that's where the electricity was. How could you play online games if you weren't indoors? And yes, you turn the lights down because it was cooler.
You could see your screen without the light.
Exactly. So what I'm trying to paint a picture here is a certain level of naivety. And a certain level of naivety, which I think actually went into the game design itself. The design of a first-person shooter has increasingly been about the better people getting better things to destroy the other people who are less good. And we're shocked that we got toxicity out of it.
Yeah,
that I think is fascinating.
When you take anonymity of playing an online game and combine it with competitiveness of playing an online game, you're obviously going to create some very nasty behavior in there.
Exactly. And what's interesting, of course, is that the anonymity is something we embraced. We were delighted to be. Athanasius, which is my Twitter handle, I'm using it on all sorts of things. Athanasius is a role-playing game character. I've been using that nickname forever. It has been my online name forever. Because it is an identity. It happens to be immortal. I won't bore you with what happened when one of the Jonas Brothers left the band and used my Twitter handle for no apparent reason. The most amazing social media night of my life, and that was just a Tuesday for them, I'm sure. But the point is that this stuff, and that anonymity was part of the appeal. It was part of the desire, but then you're put into a context where the playing behavior was about destroying other people. And rather than evolving from that into other areas of gameplay, a lot of gamers said, oh, that's how we do community. And I think that's led us down a very dark path in some experiences. But I'm glad to say that not all games are negative.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, especially right now, there is like a shift into making more like designing for community and trying to eliminate this kind of behaviors. I was listening to a talk on Riot, like on League of Legends by Riot, infamously very toxic game, and how they trying to battle it, but more with like supplementary systems rather than fundamentally with game design.
But it's interesting, even back in the day when we were doing Quake. Okay, so Quake 2 had a mod called Weapon of Choice. Now, I think it's called Weapon of Choice. I think it will. For obvious reasons, it's a phrase that's used everywhere, including pop songs. A guy called Mark Smith that built this mod. I actually ended up working with him at NVIDIA, which was a very weird. I just bumped into him. This is my favorite ever Quake mod. This is the guy that made it, and I'm now his workmate. Anyway, the point about the Weapon of Choice mod is that I killed you, I couldn't use the rocket launcher. If I killed you again, I couldn't use the lightning gun. If I killed you again, but basically keep going. I lose weapons. If you don't get me back, I lose all the weapons until I get back to an axe. The reason that's interesting is because it changed behavior. It meant that you had these crazy talented players having a great time with really newbies who just didn't know how to play, who also got to have a good time because they got to fire the rocket launchers at the insanely good players. Now, they still lost, don't get me wrong, but the sort of, it's like a Swiss bracket kind of like tournament type system. It levels the odds. It's about having a handicap. And that not just changed the playing behavior, but it meant that people who were new had a better time. It was less toxic inherently in the game design. What I find fascinating is that we haven't always seen that logic, that mindset applied throughout the history. And so what you were saying here about kind of Riot and various other people starting to bring this kind of thinking into their game design, I think the thinking has always been there. It hasn't been a commercial success. And because it hasn't been a commercial success, because it was never intended to be, it was a mod, we haven't seen that translate into as many games as maybe we'd like to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but to be fair, I think it's, how would you apply that to like purely competitive? Because that's where it's all like this is games about having fun rather than being competitive. Like the Mario Kart has the same mechanic. Like the worse you do, the more benefits you're gonna have, exactly. Which was a commercial success. So, but it's obviously not a online sport. It's
not the same genre. That's what I was kind of coming to. But you've hit the nail on the head. I think there is that. There have been commercial successes in other genres that have tapped into this more family-friendly, or just friendly, just genuinely friendly experiences. Now, I mean, there is a fine line. There is nothing wrong with having deeply competitive games. That's great. What has been an issue is that when we see that toxic behaviour coming out, and that toxic behaviour does, frankly, affects all sports. We're just talking about sport-like behavior. We are dealing with esport-like experience. It's not necessarily the actual term esport. I mean, just competitive play that relies on skill. And when you have that, and you have fans, you have people watching, there is tribalism inherent in that system. And for that tribalism to not turn negative, we have to have very strong, robust behaviors and structures in our community. We've got to make sure it's not tolerated. What happened in the 80s, 90s when black football players in the UK were being bombarded with, racist comments and racist abuse. Well, there was a movement to try to make sure it was clear that there was no place for sport with racism. We have the same principle. There should be no place in games communities for toxicity. We're here to have fun. We're here to admire and support amazing players who delight us with their skills in just the same way as we would in a sports field. There is no place to be toxic with those people. And we have to be absolutely clear about that when we're managing communities. But I like your point about we can do a lot to do with that by designing more smartly.
Exactly. What do you think? What kind of game mechanics, like specific, made those communities toxic in your opinion?
Well, I think one of the prime ones for me is that the progression method, where the person who wins always gets more stuff, which makes them more likely to win higher. Mm-hmm. And therefore they get even more stuff, and therefore they are going to beat the previous people they beat even more easily. That actually isn't a good mechanic for gameplay.
It's actually broken design in a way. Design.
Yeah, so the Call of Duty is, I think, a terrible design. I mean, no offense. If you were working on Call of Duty, fine, great. I totally admire the work you do. Don't get me wrong. But as a conceptual, strategic designer, I object. The reason I object is because of what that weapon of choice did. It showed me that actually what you want, if you're going to be playing a game against other people, is you want your game to get harder, to more challenging, but you get more rewards for basically doubling down. So one of the design techniques I talk about this for monetization. No one is ever going to do this. But let me just chuck it out at you, because I've been talking about this for 10 years. All right, I think the ultimate game design for this is, imagine you have a mod or game mode, and in this game mode, you've got to capture a point, and then you take on effectively a loincloth, a wooden stick, and there's a massive 9-foot luminous arrow pointing at you wherever you are in the map. And everybody else has guns. Right, now, imagine that person survives for 60 seconds. Just imagine that person is that good. They can survive for 60 seconds. We then sell them that outfit for $1,000. Now, bear in mind, they have the clout to buy something for $1,000. They have the skill to be able to survive wearing that thing. They've already proven that they've done that. Now imagine that girl turns up on your game server. How scared are you? Think about the critical, the social capital that has for that player. Think about the enjoyment that everybody is getting by having this almost demonic capacity character turn up on a server, creating this incredible challenge. Now they're vulnerable comparatively. Their difficulty is much higher. Their rewards for play will be much higher. But everybody gets to have more fun because they're up against one of the godlike players in the game, that they can have a real chance of scoring a few points against that godlike player. How else could you do that? And I think this is the mindset. No, I'm not saying do that. Like I say, no one's going to do that. But the mindset of that is about flipping this whole thing on its head and thinking about the 98% of players who are like me and pretty rubbish. Okay, that's not fair. I'm in the bottom 20% of players. I know strategically how to play everything, but a little bit of dyspraxia, so I'm literally just incapable of playing at a smooth level. I'll end up pressing the wrong keys all the time. The point being, though, is that I'd like to be able to play with everybody. I'd like to play with all my friends. And when some of my friends have been some of the top players in the country, I got no chance. I can't play with them. I turn up in Halo, headshot dead. Turn up again, headshot dead. Headshot dead. Headshot dead. That is my experience in most first-person shooters. And I love first-person shooters. So I think we need to step back and say, hang on a minute, why are we doing this? Is it just for the 10 people in the world who are amazing? Or is it for the 10 million people who are going to be playing today? The billion people who might ever play this game? And how do you make sure that we keep as many of them playing as possible and having a great time without compromising the value of the skill? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting what you're saying about like showcasing that skill and being like the devil player coming in.
Mm.
Because I know a lot of games have been like competitive games have been talking about like displaying like a badge of
Yeah.
honor, like in battle royales, being like you won so many games, and then when people see you, they're like, oh my god, I am scared now, or like we're doing it through cosmetics and like all of that, but like
Which is great, but let's make the mechanics more interesting as well. And I don't mean like it should be voluntary. I shouldn't have to go in with the chicken suit or whatever it might be that makes me vulnerable. I should have the choice. I should. So one of the things I do in a lot of the design that I'm working when I do so my day job is I'm a founder of a living game publisher. So a lot of the stuff we do is try and help teams understand how we get the games to last, not just for like 1 play, 9 plays. We're talking about trying to find ways to make the game playable and interesting and desirable for years. That doesn't happen unless you think about player experiences on a long term. And I've been doing consultancy in that sort of area for a long time. One of the things I always try and get people to think about is rather than giving somebody a +5 sword, let's have a +5 sword of fire, which is great in some circumstances, but as soon as you go up against a water shield, it's useless. So you've now got a level of tactics and strategy in the choices and improvements you get. It's not just linear. But that's kind of the first layer. The second layer is, what if I deliberately choose to use a weapon of a lower tier? So I'm going into a game, it's got a certain expectation of what you're supposed to go into that level with. What if I deliberately choose a lower level loadout? If that is an option, I've just increased the difficulty without having to faff about with the settings. I've made a deliberate choice. It's a bit like trying to, in something like an idle game, you might prestige your character, or you might prestige your kind of, your setup. That is a genuinely delightful thing because I'm going back to basics. I'm trying something new, but it's still the same thing I've done before. Can I do it better? These are layered, complex design thinking things, but what they deliver is a empowerment for the player to deliberately be able to bring themselves down to a level where they can play with more people and make it more about playing with other people. And I think that might be the key here. I think what we're really talking about is, why should I care about the other players? How does the designer make it easier for me to care that other people have a good experience? And I think that, at the heart of it, I suppose that's really what I'm on about. Yes, I've come from the lens of first-person shooters back in the day, but then look at something like, so I was home architect on PlayStation's Virtual World PlayStation Home. Saw some amazing experiences in that, particularly in the beginning where there was no content. So we launched it. I was brought in, I was given 3 months to help make it go live, and within 6 months we managed to get a package of experience that we could launch with. And there was basically nothing to do because we were relying on third parties to build content in the game. What did people do? Well, they came in and they talked to each other, and they basically rubbed themselves up against the collision layers so they could pop up in the middle of nowhere, literally floating in midair. That was fun. Honestly, that was actually fun. It was stupid. It was inane. We got completely ripped apart in the games press for it. And yet, what it meant was you talk to people. How did you do that? Oh, that's how you did that. Then you tried it. And now you were talking to somebody else. You're engaging with somebody else. You cared about the other player. So even when they shut it down in 2015, you have people sitting in spaces. Like one of my favorite shots is a video of it, a YouTube clip of it on the last day, the 1st of April. Yes, 1st of April,
Great
2015.
day.
Great day. And they're sitting on this beach front with a fire, stacked up in the middle of this virtual beach, just talking to their friends for the last time in that virtual world. That's heartbreaking.
It is sad.
Brilliant at the same time. But that's the thing, I think, where you get rid of toxicity. Don't get me wrong, we had our own version of toxicity in home, and we had death threats against particularly the US team. Fortunately, nothing happened. It was all fine. But you do get this. What was interesting though is a little a game that people had. So you would dress up as the most attractive female character you could, and then you wandered around to people and you saw a lot of the impressionable players, shall we say, coming up and trying to talk to that character. And then you'd flip avatars to the ugliest possible creature you could make out of the system. This was Gilberting. They literally coined the term Gilberting. Don't ask me where it came from, but Gilberting was this term. People were having fun playing with this principle of here's a toolkit, and what can we do with it? And maybe that's the heart of what makes Toxicity go, is creating a framework where you don't accept toxic behavior.
And also, it's interesting. So the in Sea of Thieves, the designers were talking about like social lubricants. That's, I think, what you're talking about. Like basically giving players tools to play with, like musical instruments or like some game-breaking bugs that are fun to share and fun to do together.
Yes, I think that's a really good way to put it. Social. We don't have alcohol. I'm not saying that you have to have alcohol to have fun. Don't get me wrong. Yeah, this is not. I don't drink. It's fine. I'm not trying to advocate anything. But what a lot of people talk about is this idea of social lubricants. I think it's a really interesting thing. It's a number of things. So it could be something like, I literally just got through Awkward, the card version of a game by Martin and Joe and the other folks at Snap, I think, and Click, who they actually, Martin used to work with me on PlayStation Home, which is kind of funny. But that's a kind of like, they intentionally use like things like Twitch and YouTube and stuff like that, but it's all about social games. Awkward happens to be one where you ask people questions. Are you going to, which should you ban? Should you ban hugs or kisses? You know, and it's a sort of stupid principle, but it's a frame point to trigger controversy, to trigger dilemma, to trigger kind of social engagement. And so that could be as simple as like posing a dilemma question that's nonsensical. It could be as fun as putting a musical instrument. It's so easy to play. You just press 1 to 8 on the number pad. Why do I say 1 to 8 on number pad? Because that's what they did in Lord of the Rings Online. I can't play musical instruments for toffee. Yeah, I found myself playing an instrument in Lord of the Rings Online because I could. Little things like that make a magic difference to player experience. But I think it has to have a central heartbeat to the core of why you're in the game. I think that's really a kind of crux. I've got more I want to add to that, but I'll let you carry on because I'm going to go off on a massive tangent.
I mean, go for it. Like, I'm sure it will be very interesting.
Well, let's talk about GDC. I think it was 2011. The Wizard of the Coast guys, Magic the Gathering guys were on. Now, I'm a bit biased with Magic the Gathering. I was the third person in the UK to buy a deck. I know this.
How do you know that?
They came over to the UK at an event called Gen Con, the UK version, down in. It was in Canberra Sands that year. Yes, this is a stupid holiday camp. It was very, very cold. Let's just leave it at that. But I only found out about the game because of two of my friends who were really kind of aware of what was going on in the scene. So this unknown company turns up, unloads these boxes. The two people in front of me were my mates. That's the only reason why I was there, is because they told me, come and do this. So third person line, and I get these cards. So I have had a really interest in Magic going for a long time, but I'm not a good player. I will never be a massive player. I don't play it very often, but I do love the idea of it. Anyway, so the point being is that they're talking about the way the community works for Magic the Gathering. So what's interesting is if you talk to any Magic player, they will tell you this is the strategy. And every time a new deck comes out, that is the new strategy. It's always the new deck. And to be fair, there was a point in the history of Magic the Gathering where each new deck basically beat the last one, which nearly killed the game. And they got wise to that. And what they decided instead is to make it so strategy would be ambiguous. That means there is no winning strategy in Magic the Gathering. The combination of the different mana types, the different card types, different card strategies, you can build a deck and it will compete with most of the other decks really well. But people don't believe that. People are convinced. In fact, the more ambiguous Magic the Gathering has got in terms of strategy, the more convinced people are that they have the ultimate deck. And what has happened is that the debates about strategy have become the pivotal thing. So it means that it's less toxic. It's more about the engagement with the game design. And I think that's where it's really fascinating. I'll give you an example of Counter-Strike. So one of the things I love about Counter-Strike is the way that is played is that we have an intense conflict which is focused around specific choke points in the flow of the map, which you learn through playing regularly. There are different strategies and tactics to evolve your way to command those choke points, but essentially it is a beautifully designed structure. We play intensely, we die, we have a break. We have this process where there's like 2 or 3 minutes between each intense. So you've got this intensity, relief, intensity, relief. That's fine. Sound familiar to any game designers out there. Intensity and relief, isn't that what we try and do to create flow? So we have that inherently in Counter-Strike. What's also we have is time to plan, time to reset our weapons. So I think Counter-Strike is a beautiful design. You could argue World of Tanks is Counter-Strike for old people like me. That's very derogatory. I don't mean it derogatory. It's a good thing. It means that anyone can play World of Tanks, and you get the same core pleasure of being able to have that intensity and then that relief. But we get to talk about what is the right tactics, what the right strategy, who we're going to send where. We can actually work as a team. And I think when you start engaging, not just as individuals, but as teams, you have a stake in the experience. And I wonder if there's another element there. So far, we've talked about the ability to play with difficulty. We've talked about being able to make things more difficult rather than easier as you improve. We've talked about how ambiguity can be massively important. But I think also to have a stake in the community is important.
I would add to that, though, stake in the community can be very dangerous, because I feel like that's sometimes what actually causes toxicity. When your individual failure is going to lead the team to fail, this is going to be a very toxic environment. Whereas
potentially, yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, let's talk about that more. So, I mean, when you're, so I get the example you're referring to. Let's say League of Legends. One person is bad, everybody tries to destroy that person.
Yeah.
Which is horrifying. What instead, surely the answer to that is to have mechanics where it is the incentive of the leading players to bring the new players up to speed. And what is it in the game design where you want to recruit low-level players? At the moment, that doesn't exist in League of Legends. And I think that's one of the reasons why there's that level of toxicity. So each of these pieces could potentially, any game design can go bad, can't it? I think the not accepting the bad is the first rule. Not, making it clear to people that that's not acceptable behaviour. I think prolific use of ban is very wise. You have to be a bit careful with that, though.
Yeah.
Because, obviously, you don't want to ban everybody.
and then lose your entire community to banning.
Yeah, exactly. It takes me back to there was a reason why they used that language back in the day, and it wasn't about. There were still bad actors, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't about when my mates were slamming on me. It wasn't just negative. There was a thing which we now don't like the word banter because of all of its negative connotations, but there was a thing where that banter was a positive part of the experience. But for us, if you weren't part of the in-group, then it was not a positive. And that's kind of what I meant by having a stake. It's more about how do you make the grouping more inclusive, more inviting, and less exclusionary. I think it's the vectors of exclusion that are the problem, I would argue.
I think you can actually do it through game mechanics, like things like leaderboards. If you highlight how many times the person died, everyone knows how bad they are. Whereas if you don't highlight individual failures, then it brings more friendliness. And also, as you were saying, we should give players reasons to help new players rather than like make them quit and argue with them.
Yeah, I mean, leaderboards are one I struggle with because leaderboards, I think, have to have relevance. They have to
Absolutely.
be leaderboards that matter to me. I don't. A top world all time is a useless leaderboard in my mind. I will never be on it. I will never be on the top million of it. Why should I care about it? Now, okay, yeah, I know I'm a bit rubbish, but that's not the reason I hate them. It's because I don't think they give anybody any good advice. What I love is factions. And I'll explain that a bit more. Pokemon Go style factions. So the reason why I love Pokemon Go style faction is everybody is automatically assigned something. Red, yellow, blue, whatever it is. You can choose to change it one time, but basically it is a relatively even split of the entire community. And there's no more than 3, maybe 5 factions in an experience like that. Every play that you do, regardless of how bad or whatever it is or good, every single play that you do increases the effectiveness of the whole faction. That's really critical. Even if I only incrementally add something, the fact that I have played will have increased the average play of that faction. That inherently gives you a lot of the things you were talking about there in terms of like feeling like you're part of the community, you've got a stake, and having meaningful experiences. Now, I love factions for that point of view. I think we don't use them smartly enough. Yeah, the fact that we can go and take over a poker gym is one thing. And it doesn't mean much, but when you see like 20 people standing around in the middle of a park and they're flicking their phones simultaneously at something, that's kind of cool. I mean, remember, I don't play Pokemon. I have lots of friends. In fact, a lot of my team are obsessed with Pokemon Go. We have away days, and they're still sitting there. And we were in France the other day because my business partner lives in France. We brought a few of the team over. They're sitting there trying to get local Pokemon, and that conversation I have, the knowledge, the insider lore. In fact, we haven't really talked about that. The use of insider lore to be part of the in-group. To be able to create this kind of factionalization that is manageable because it's small numbers of factions and large numbers of people per faction, because of the intent of having an individual contribution matters no matter how small. This kind of mindset, I think, is transitional. Does it get rid of toxicity? No. Does it minimize it? It can do. If you have all of the other pieces together, a robust community team who are well supported, who have clear FAQs, who know the right rules of engagement, who don't put up with bullshit, basically. They don't put up with that negativity, who stamp on it immediately it happens. Where there's clear transparency that if you act inappropriately, we know who you are. You're traceable. No, I don't mind having an alias system. I'm quite happy with alias systems. But if you sign up, I need to know that you're something about you. Now, there's a fine line here. All right, privacy, age appropriate design code, GDPR. There's a whole bunch of things in there that needs to be taken care of. I say that as we did some work with the Information Commission Office on the age appropriate design code, giving recommendations to games team on how to store data appropriately and what data to store and where and how, blah, blah, blah. So I don't want to go into that. That's a whole different podcast.
Might do one about that as well. I feel like it's very important to know.
Yeah, well, I just did a talk on it with the Game Forum folks in London this week, and it was amazing how everyone knows about GDPR. They don't know about the age appropriate design code. And the age appropriate design code has just profoundly, it was introduced last year. It profoundly changed the rules of engagement. Basically, you have to prove someone's over 18, or you cannot assume that they are. That's not a credit card transaction either. That doesn't count. No, I won't bore you with the details for now, but if anyone's interested in that, I'm sure I've done a webinar on that at some point on our Fundamental Game site, but I can always do a podcast if there's interest out there. The crux I'm trying to get to here is we have a contract with the player. There are roles and responsibilities. Our contract is we're going to provide you with amazing entertainment that you're going to get fully immersed and engaged with, and we're going to provide a context for that where you can play and engage with that. In order to do that well, we've got to design well. We're going to design in, like you said, the structures that make playing make sense. But we also have to design our ability to make their consequences if you act inappropriately. The problem we have is that even after 20 years, or in my case, I've been using internet since 1984. Picture that, right? A 96 baud modem on an Apple IIe since 1984. Yes, I am that old. I think I was 15 at the time. Anyway, point being that we have still not adapted culturally to social norms online. If we had somebody behaving like they do online, they would be, if they did it in real person, they would be done for assault, or they would be done for, aggressive behavior, threatening. They would be imprisoned for some of the behavior we've seen. I remember during the Me Too kind of era, a friend of mine was showing me a photograph that she had sent to her of a guy licking a knife that said, "I know where you are," and the GPS coordinates said that he was basically within about 100 meters.
It's so scary.
Yeah. That was sent to the FBI, and the FBI did nothing. Nothing. If you did that in real life, that guy would be in prison. No question. Done. Yeah. So we have failed to do basic, normal, agreed practice online that we should do. That's not too hard to try, by the way. I've been in telcos, so back in the early days, that 1998 wire play with British Telecom. We had our own kind of like police kind of access at British Telecom back in the day. It was an interesting kind of thing where we had to be very careful. For example, never happened, thankfully, but we had a process in place if anyone came across anything inappropriate. Fortunately, nothing like child pornography ever happened, thank goodness, but we had to create systems so that we didn't get our community team prosecuted, because the way the law was written, if that material was on their machine, they were liable. Even though it was connected and it wasn't their fault, somebody posting it to them would have made them criminally liable. So we had to protect our community team, and we had a whole system agreed with the Metropolitan Police Authority so that we had processes to make sure that if anything was discovered, they would back away immediately. The single point of contact would be able to go, stick it on a USB stick or whatever it was at the time, and send it to the Metropolitan Police. Now, thankfully, that never had to be done. Not in my project, anyway. What that meant was that we had to think about this protection of not just the player, but also the community team managing the experience. Now we're thinking about much more than just the legal things. We've got to think about the mental health side of things. There's a lot of social anxiety out there. There's a lot of people who could potentially be outed, causing them severe risk. And, we have a responsibility when we're running communities, not just to create great games and delightful experiences, but to deal with the information that people are sharing, and often recklessly, in a sensible and efficient way.
Yeah, especially kids who don't even understand like what is okay and not okay. It's like it's a responsibility on us when we have things like chats and we share gamer tags and this. Like we need to be very careful protecting someone's privacy.
Things like the profanity filters, things like the not sharing of phone numbers or emails. I don't want to get into like Club Penguin style templated chat, although that has been something we've done on some games. But there is an interesting kind of conundrum even now, even though we've had like 20 years, 30 years of doing this stuff, we still have a level of unawareness amongst particularly the families. And so we still have generations of people who are learning about how to do this stuff. And I think, like you said before, at the end of the day, we have a responsibility to players. We are responsible for them to have fun. We want to make sure that they feel like we're in a safe environment. You know, there will be some games where that's not part of the agenda, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm saying, some hardcore games that are intentionally for adults, that do have violent and horror themes, probably don't want to be as responsible. That's the wrong word. I don't mean as responsible, because they do want to be responsible. Of course they do. I don't want to take it out of context. But the level of risk is a different one. We're talking about a Mario Kart level experience. It has got to be family friendly, family safe. That is the brand. That is the identity. So maybe what I'm trying to get to is, it's also about the context of the game. And there are thresholds of what good and acceptable behaviour is. I think there is still space for games where we can, swear at each other and, say shitty things to each other if we aren't in on the joke. The problem is, how do you know that you're in on the joke? How do you know that it is a joke? And what the trouble with the anonymity of games, and online games in particular, is we feel immune. It's like sitting in a car in the street. We can road rage in a car because no one can hear us. No one can, hurt us because we're in the middle of our car. And obviously, that has a toxic cascading effect. The more we do it, the more free we are to do it, the more habitual it becomes, the less we pay attention to the shadow it casts. And so I think it just comes back to the game has to establish what its ground rules are and keep to it. It has to establish what its brand is and keep to it. It has to be true to its brand ideas in its design. GTA, I do not expect to have a untoxic community. It is intentionally a toxic community when you play characters who are as toxic as those characters we play. I can't stand Grand Theft Auto 5's characters at all. I find them all hateful. I don't want to play them, which makes me really sad because I think the game's amazing, but I really do not like the characters. There's no redeemable features at all, and I know that's the humour. It just doesn't work for me. Respect the team, respect the people who love playing it. It just doesn't work for me. That being said, I don't expect that community to be, sending each other, flowers at the weekend. It's
but they're not going to be toxic. I don't think there is a place for toxicity in any game or whatsoever. You can be competitive, but it has to stay within limits. And that's why a lot of games right now push really hardly to eliminate anything like League and Overwatch and GTA 5, all of them.
But I'm not talking about toxicity there. I'm talking about tone.
Yeah,
there's no place for toxicity, absolutely. But there are nuances in tone which you're going to expect a different experience from a GTA community than you would a Mario Kart.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's all I mean.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one thing to point out as well, it can be on players as well to enforce the community. Players in games with different servers, they make their own house rules, and you need to provide tools for players to reinforce them in your game.
Now, that I totally agree. We should do more and more of that. Some of the best community experiences I've had have all been coming from players. And the more we empower players, I mean, this is the whole point of UGC in general, is the more that we empower players, the more the game becomes a critical part of where the players own it, not us. The players are determining what is acceptable increasingly. And I think that's a brilliant thing. Because then it's you don't break the rules because you'd be against everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, why would you? I'll give you a couple of my favourite examples. Obviously, you've got the World of Warcraft, and I've got several friends. In fact, I actually did a podcast with a mate of mine who, and Hanneke isn't in the games industry at all, but she, as a player, she talked to me, and I particularly asked her because she's just great and a good friend, and also she and Kevin, her husband, met in World of Warcraft. And now I'm married, I have a kid. etc. So I love that part of the experience. That what we're talking about here is actually something meaningful in people's lives. World of Warcraft in particular, but other games have been absolutely meaningful to people's lives. So much so that their loves of their lives are found through that vehicle. That is a magical thing. One of the sad examples of that was actually back in the Wireplay days. One of the community in I forgot the name of the game now. Air Attack. That's it. The game was called Air Attack. One member of the community in Air Attack died in a car crash. I think it was a car crash. The community was devastated because he was a very popular, well-known person. We're talking about a much smaller community in those days than we do now, of course, because it was dial-up modem, because it was back in the early days. So we changed the map so it had a gravestone for him in the map. And we had an official fly past day. Now, this is a game that could probably have 20 people in the server, comfortably playing. It crashed after 150 people joined it. And that was 150 people in turn. That wasn't a whole total number of people who came in to pay their respects to this guy. We actually recovered in the time. It was one of the first online community events covered in national papers in the UK. And it was to do with the genuine grief for the loss of a friend that they'd learned and engaged with through playing a game. Games are powerful. We know it instinctively when we play it, but we forget sometimes to have the perspective of we're talking about people's hobbies, their communities, their friends groups, people they may not meet personally in physical, but they spend more time with than almost anybody else. And if we don't create climates for that, if we don't create the reasons to people to return, we're not just robbing them of a great game experience, we're actually robbing them of their friendship group, if that makes sense.
Yeah, friendship built in games is as real as the real life and as powerful.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Let's conclude on this because we are running out of time and there is still a lot more to talk about here.
There's so many areas we could go into, but I'd love I think to sum it up, I think we need to treat community with respect. We need to treat players with respect, but we have to expect them to respect each other. And by creating that social lubricant, those kind of elements that are visual or exciting or engaging, are led by them, whether it's user-generated content in its purest sense, or even those simple musical instruments, or the fact that there are bugs you can exploit, like we had in PlayStation Home. Things like that are actually joyful moments, but also thinking about how you level up and progress in ways where you can get more players playing with each other rather than fewer and making it more punishing. That doesn't have to mean that you're compromising on the skill of the player, quite the opposite. But also we can actually have spaces where people can indulge in pure skill. That's what esports is about. There's more people watching video game related content than Netflix, Prime, HBO combined. And they do that because when you look at a game, when you look at an experience of people who are genuinely amazing at it, it's a joy to watch. So, let's look at all of these elements. Let's see how we can make the best experience. And let's have, clear guidelines for our teams of how we want our game to appear for the player. Sometimes it's in the game design itself. Sometimes it's in the way we manage communities. Sometimes it's the brand identity. But we have to have joined up thinking. We want to put players first. It's about player experience.
Absolutely. To add to that, it's not that any game mechanics are inherently bad or good. It's about you understanding what it's going to do to your community and how to mitigate anything bad that will happen out of it.
What is the shadow it casts? I think we often forget the shadow it casts.
Exactly. And that concludes our episode of the Game Dev London podcast. Thank you so much, Oscar. Do you want to share your online, where people can find you online?
Yeah, you can find me, I'm easy to find. You can look at fundamentally.games, or you can look up Athanasius, Athanateus. Yes, it's a horrible name, but I've had it forever, as you have had explained. You can also Google me, Oscar Clark Games. You'll find me. I'm not the guitar player or the Canadian cyclist.
I wish I was Googleable, Jesus. That's some celebrity here with us. Thank you for everyone who tuned in. You can find us here again the same time next week with more episodes. And don't forget to check out the Game Dev London for any updates, news, and events, and also our Discord channel. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye then.